What's up, guys? In this video, I'm going to tell you how to eat for high testosterone levels. Many of you have been asking, what foods increase testosterone? What do you eat to boost testosterone levels naturally? And yes, I'm going to tell you that in this video and take it a step further, because eating for high testosterone levels goes beyond just what you eat. It also includes how much you eat and then the timing of when you eat. So we're going to unpack all of this in this video. And if you would like the full protocol of what I've done to increase my testosterone by 400% naturally, you can get my free course in the link in the description below. I go through the full protocol of what I've done the last 2 years to increase my testosterone from 194 nanograms per deciliter to a total of 763 nanograms per deciliter. You can get that full protocol in the free course in the link in the description below. Now, this is a topic that I'm highly passionate about, and yes, I may go down some rabbit holes. We may get off track a bit, and I'm going to do my best to bring us back on track. This topic of low testosterone in men and this crisis of low testosterone is becoming a widespread issue. We can see that men year after year are experiencing a decrease in testosterone levels and fertility. In fact, over the last 30 years, men's testosterone has decreased by 30%, meaning that the man your father was or the man your grandfather was 30 years ago would have been 30% higher levels of testosterone than today. And this is not just a trend that we're seeing go down, but it's actually accelerating down. And we can see if we project out 5, 10, 15 years from now, men's testosterone levels are going to be even lower, and fertility, the ability to reproduce, may be non-existent for men. Some people would love that. Institutions, organizations, globalist groups that may want people to be a little less popular, to have a lower level of population and inability to reproduce. Without going too far in that direction, what exactly is causing this decrease in men's testosterone levels? Why are men suffering from decreased semen quality, infertility? It's all related, but why is this happening? What is the cause of this? And if we take a deeper look into our environmental factors, our food, our water, what we're putting in our body, on our body, what we find is that there are these endocrine disrupting chemicals in our environment, in the products that we're using, in the food that we're eating, in the water that we're drinking. We're finding these EDCs, these endocrine disrupting chemicals, widespread in our environment. These include things such as pesticides, herbicides, plasticides. What are the most common herbicides that we know of? It's glyphosate, Roundup. What is the most common plasticides that we're aware of? These are the BPAs, the PFAs, the PUFAs. These products, these chemicals are affecting our natural production of hormones. And we can see this in our food, we see this in our water, and we see this in our body care products. And this information is actually suppressed. Now, we see some data that supports the effects of glyphosate decreasing men's testosterone levels. We see this primarily in rat studies right now, where we can see that rats actually had their testosterone levels crushed by glyphosate or Roundup. This is genetically modifying the food, and as we're starting to see in the data, this is actually affecting men's testosterone levels. How can we decrease our exposure to these EDCs? Well, the number one way in terms of our food is to buy organic food. This means this food has not been sprayed with pesticides, herbicides, and you want to buy food that is actually real food. This is food that your grandmother, your grandfather, they would recognize as food. They wouldn't go to the store, buy something in a box that looks like potentially dog food, that these lobbyist organizations that they paid millions of dollars to the Food and Drug Administration to tell you that eating whole grains is good for you, that fat is bad, avoid cholesterol, sodium's bad. They pay tons of money to sell you that you should buy their genetically modified processed food at a very low price, that this is good for you. Well, that's just frankly complete bullshit. Instead of buying that processed bullshit that's decreasing your testosterone levels, you want to actually buy organic food, buy real food, animals, plants, veggies, fruits, actual real food. And this is the best way that you can begin by reducing your exposure to these EDCs. And then the next step is if you are preparing food at home, you're preparing leftovers or you're heating up foods, make sure that you're using glass containers. You don't want to be using these plastic containers, these Tupperware, these different plastic-based storage containers that are toxic. These leach these chemicals, these PBAs, the PFAs, into your foods. And then you eat this and then it binds with your body and interrupts your hormones. Make sure that you're buying real organic food and then store your food in glass containers. Now, when it comes to water, we clearly see that there are PFAs, there are PBAs, there's these chemicals in our water. And we're finding these endocrine disrupting chemicals in our water, which are causing our testosterone levels to be lower. And what's really interesting is that the FDA, they've approved these chemicals as safe. They put these chemicals in our food, in our water, and they say that these are safe amounts. But in reality, if we look at the research, we can see that these amounts are actually affecting our hormones. So you want to avoid drinking tap water, this highly processed water. Anything that you're buying in, say, juices, in fruit drinks, in different performance drinks, a lot of this water is not good quality water. So you want to be sure that you're drinking, say, spring water, if you can find a good quality source of water. And then when you are drinking your water, make sure you're drinking it out of glass. You can also get really nice home water filtration systems. I have myself an AquaTrue that I use, but these are some of the steps that I've done to reduce my exposure to these EDCs. This has been one of the key factors that I began with on my journey of increasing my testosterone levels naturally. So avoiding these EDCs in our foods, in our water, that's step number one, is first to remove the nonsense. And yes, I understand this is contrary to what is preached by these different regulating bodies. Why is it called the Food and Drug Administration? Is it because they can sell us these Frankenstein foods and then sell us the drugs to make us healthy from the foods that make us sick? Or is that just a conspiracy theory? I don't know. That's something for you to figure out yourself. But it's really interesting how clearly these environmental factors in our food, in our water, and our testosterone levels, our hormones, it all correlates. And yes, there is some data out there, but again, the people that do the data have to be paid by somebody to do the research. And if you follow the money, you'll see that there's certain agendas that people have in order to make the research look a certain way. And more recently, we've seen how a study came out that showed us that a lot of the research out there has actually been bunk bullshit research. And there's been a lot of fake studies that have been submitted to journals that weren't actually real studies, that didn't have real data. And it all comes back to showing a certain agenda. We've talked about avoiding EDCs. Now we're going to talk about calorie consumption. Because if you're eating too many calories, if you're overweight, if you're obese, you have a large amount of body fat, you're actually going to have lower levels of testosterone, because higher body fat correlates with lower levels of testosterone. So if, for example, we have the case of somebody that is, say, overweight, excess body fat, if they go into a caloric deficit, goes into a period of caloric restriction, this will actually increase their testosterone. And it does it through decreasing body fat, and it does this through increasing testicular function. So if you are somebody that is overweight, excess body fat, maybe you're morbidly obese, one of the best things you can do to eat for higher testosterone is to decrease your caloric consumption, to go into a caloric deficit. And this shows us that obese men going into a caloric deficit increases their testosterone through these two ways of decreasing body fat and increasing testicular function. Now, if we go to the opposite end of the spectrum, say for the case of somebody in the final weeks of preparing for a bodybuilding competition where their goal is to get down to as low body fat possible, we see that these men who are in a caloric deficit and that are under body weight, low body fat, we see that when they're eating for a caloric deficit, this actually decreases their testosterone levels. So men who are underweight, that have low body fat, they're very, very lean. If they're eating in a caloric deficit, they're going to have even lower levels of testosterone. And I looked at a study that looked at endurance athletes and how many of these endurance athletes tend to be very lean, and they tend to be operating in a caloric deficit because of how much physical activity they're doing. It can be tough to get enough calories to sustain what they're doing and perform as an endurance athlete. And what we find in these endurance athletes is they tend to have lower levels of testosterone. So it really comes down to where you currently are with your physique and finding somewhere in that Goldilocks zone of not too little, not too much, and finding what is the sweet spot for you. There's so many different nuances to how much to eat for optimal testosterone. And this can even be cycled, whether it's doing a cycle every couple of days, you go higher calorie, low calorie every couple of days, or over several weeks, you can do different phases. There's so many different subtleties and nuances that we could get into, but looking at the research, it's very clear that if you're overweight and you have excess body fat, by going into a caloric deficit and eating less calories, this will be one of the best ways for you to increase your testosterone. And if you're underweight, if you're in a deficit and say you're very, very lean, one of the best ways for you to increase your testosterone is to simply eat more, whether it's go back to maintenance or whether it's be in a surplus. Strictly looking at calories, this is what the data shows us. So this is just more ammo to show that if you're too far at either end of the spectrum, you're going to have low levels of testosterone. So find the Goldilocks zone, the range for you when it comes to your caloric consumption of how much to actually eat. Now, when it comes to what are the type of foods to eat to increase testosterone, this may be controversial because this goes against what many of the recommendations are out there in terms of what to eat, what's good for you, what this is going to do to your physiology. We're going to unpack some of these myths in this section. And we're going to look at this beginning with a macronutrient and a micronutrient standpoint. So looking at the macronutrient standpoint, the most important things are getting sufficient protein and sufficient fat. And when it comes to protein, what works best for me and what a lot of the data shows is 1 gram per 1 pound of body weight. And this works for me. This works for somebody that is around, say, the 10 to 15% body fat range, where if you have a higher level of body fat percentage, you may want to be doing more like 0.08 gram per 1 pound of body mass. And this is because if you have excess body fat, we don't need to nourish that body fat with protein. And in fact, if you have excess body fat, your testosterone is going to be lower. So you should be consuming slightly less. When it comes to protein, we typically want to keep our protein consistent, keeping that as your foundation and then building off from there. When it comes to our fat consumption, this is something that is controversial because we've all been told in the 90s that fat is bad, that you should eat fat-free foods, and that cholesterol is evil. It's going to give you a heart attack. And this is all just more mythology, more bunk, more bullshit from the Food and Drug Administration that's telling you that you should eat a certain way based off of the research. And this is something that if you actually look at the food pyramid and then within that food pyramid, look at the companies of the manufacturers who manufacture the food, and then look at where their money goes and how much money they give to the establishment in order to promote eating a certain way. And we can clearly see that this food pyramid that has all these breads, grains, pastas, all of this nonsense, it's the base at the bottom of the food pyramid. This is clearly not working. So fun game, you can go do the research yourself, but what it comes down to is eating cholesterol is not going to raise your blood levels of cholesterol. Unless you have a genetic polymorphism that causes you to take dietary cholesterol and increase your actual blood cholesterol, this is not generally the case. So eating cholesterol, eating fat, these are actually foundational for us to make testosterone. Testosterone is an oil-based hormone, which means that we need oils, we need fats, we need cholesterol, and actually to synthesize this hormone, we need fats, cholesterol, these lipids to actually make these hormones. So the men that are eating a low-fat diet, not only are they having a hard time making testosterone because they're missing the building blocks for testosterone, but they're actually going to notice that eating a low-fat diet is going to wear on you cognitively, because our brain, our nerves, our bodies are literally oily bags of salt water, which means we have fats, we have electrolytes, and we have water. Those are the foundations of what makes our body. And if we aren't getting enough fat, and if we aren't getting enough electrolytes, and if we're not getting enough water, our bodies are going to deteriorate. And what do we see in the 90s when they pushed this low-fat diet craze is we saw more incidents of dementia, of Alzheimer's, of cognitive memory brain diseases. And this is all stems back to this deficit of fat consumption. We've been malnourished from fat, which then affects our hormones, our thyroid, our testosterone, our growth hormone, our estrogen. All of these hormones need fats in order to synthesize our hormones. So if you look at what is recommended, we're being recommended to avoid fats, to avoid eating animal proteins, animal fats. We're being told that cholesterol is bad. And if somebody follows that sort of recommendation, this is actually going to nuke your hormones. And we can clearly see this. And if you look at the reverse, if you look at actually what is recommended, eating whole grains, pastas, eating your Coca-Cola or your Pepsi or all of your different bullshit drinks, the Boost, if you look at what they recommend for people that are undergoing cancer treatment that may have a G-tube, a feeding tube, this Fed Pharma food funded organization, this conglomerate of these companies trying to make money, what they recommend as a first line food recommendation for cancer treatment is a product called Boost, which is glucose syrup. It's high fructose corn syrup. It's highly sugar oriented. And this is exactly what cancer feeds on. So it's so ass backwards on what's recommended, what's given to sick patients, the food pyramid, what's recommended with whole grains. Now what they're telling us that animal protein is bad, that you should eat these plant-based proteins, eat your soy, eat your highly genetically modified foods, that's the way, and that meat is causing cancer, that meat's causing all these problems. And it's all just complete nonsense. If we look at the research on those people who eat high levels of processed foods, of breads, of pastas, of desserts, they have higher blood sugar, higher body fat, and lower testosterone. We see this very clearly in the research that the people that are eating these processed foods, pastas, grains, breads, desserts, high fructose corn syrup, anyone that's eating these highly processed carbohydrates, they have higher body fat, they have lower levels of testosterone. Just really simplify the foods that we eat and get more back to how primal humans would eat. How would we eat in nature? How would humans eat if we were living off the land? We would be eating animal proteins. We would be eating plants in the wild, berries, fruits, vegetables, eating actual real foods. This is how we want to eat. We want to choose these type of foods as the primary source of our nutrition. So if we want to be focused on optimizing our testosterone, we want to be sure that we're getting the right kind of macronutrients, which is primarily protein-based, fat-based. If you're performing at a high level, an athlete, yeah, you want to get some carbohydrates that'll help you to recover. But it all comes back to hitting your protein, hitting your fat, and then being sure that you're getting the right micronutrients, meaning your vitamins and your minerals. And the best way to do this is to simply eat your animal proteins, such as beef, steak, bison, eggs, fish, good quality sources of these animal proteins are so nutrient dense. They have tons of vitamins, tons of minerals. And if you can get into good quality organ meats such as liver, heart, these are so nutrient dense that it's just going to give your body so much fuel to actually be healthy, synthesize new tissue, create your hormones, and optimize your testosterone. So the best way to do this is to eat your animal proteins, get healthy levels of good cholesterol, of fat, compare those two different groups, just strictly a type of person that eats more paleo-based, fats, proteins, a little bit of good quality carbs. Compare that to somebody who eats primarily a processed diet of breads, cereals, your plant proteins, etc., that nonsense. And you can see very clearly in the data that fats, proteins, good quality animal sources is going to be the best option when it comes to optimizing your testosterone. Without going too far off the deep end, we can also see that a keto-based diet of high fat, low carb, moderate protein. We can also see that a carnivore diet, all meat diet. These diets are actually highly beneficial and show compelling evidence for helping people who have autoimmune disorders or even seizures. What we find is that if they go on a carnivore diet, a keto diet, or even a protocol such as the Walls protocol, these are some of the best diet protocols in order to help somebody who has autoimmune disorder. And it just so happens that it's these diet protocols that actually help you to optimize your testosterone. And none of it includes these processed bullshit foods. When it comes to choosing good quality animal protein sources, you want to choose foods that are grass-fed and that are free of antibiotics and hormones. It's by choosing these grass-fed and hormone-free foods that are going to help to ensure that you have the best quality animal protein sources possible. Now we'll talk about meal timing, when to eat, timing of foods, and if we eat too late, if we eat too early, what that can do to our hormones, and when is the best time to eat for high testosterone. And we can see that there's some interesting data out there in terms of when testosterone levels are the highest and how we want to eat to have the highest levels of testosterone. Testosterone levels tend to be highest in the morning and they start to wane throughout the day. And if we want to keep our testosterone levels up as high as possible for as long as possible, then we're going to want to avoid eating within the first hour or two of waking up. If you've ever gone to get a blood lab test, you'll have been told by the laboratory to go in fasted, to not eat before your blood lab test. And the reason is because if you eat before you take your test, this is actually going to affect your testosterone levels amongst many of the other values as well. So eating first thing in the morning will actually blunt and decrease your testosterone levels, where if you can draw it out and maybe wait an hour or two, or just choose the right kind of foods, such as eating maybe eggs or something lighter in fat and protein, that can help you to keep your hormones at a good level without giving yourself a massive blood sugar spike. Because if you did eat the recommended oatmeal, cereal, toast, breads, that's actually going to cause a big blood sugar spike and then crush your testosterone, crush your hormones. So instead of doing that, what I personally do is I'll eat higher levels of fat and protein foods in the earlier part of the day. And then as the day goes on, I'll bring in more carbohydrates beginning around my training. And then later in the day for dinner time, I'll have more complex carbs, which can help me to wind down and then have a 2 or 3 hour window before I go to bed. Which brings me to the next point on if we eat too close to bedtime, that's actually going to impair your testosterone levels. Because if you're eating very close to bedtime, what this does is it puts your body into a state of digestion throughout the night. So your digestive system's working, all of your blood is pooled in your organs to process and digest this food, which affects your brain's ability to sleep, the lymphatic system's ability to clear out different plaques, toxins, and metabolites. We want to go into our bedtime with about 2 hours since our last meal before bed. This allows your body to release growth hormone in the earlier part of the night, which is optimal for your growth hormone. And as you sleep throughout the night, it allows your testosterone levels to then go up so that you do have the peak levels of testosterone in the morning. And a good indicator on how well you slept is if you wake up with a morning erection. This tells you that you slept well that night, you're waking up, your hormones are reared up, ready to go, and you have higher levels of testosterone in the morning. So this is a good indicator that you can default to in the morning times. Now, I get questions all of the time on intermittent fasting, and is intermittent fasting good for testosterone? Is it good for my hormones? Is it going to help me to lose body fat? Can it help me to gain muscle? Is it good for longevity? Well, intermittent fasting has its place for certain people, and it depends on their situation as well. What the data suggests is that intermittent fasting is not optimal for testosterone levels. We see this in a research article here that shows that men who were working out, they were intermittent fasting, and they would have all of their food prior to 4 p.m. And what this data found was that their levels of testosterone had decreased. And although their testosterone did decrease, they maintain their body mass, their muscle, their lean body mass. So it's interesting how, yes, they maintain their lean body mass, but they did experience a decrease in testosterone levels. Now, I would personally want to see more data on this. There's not a ton of data on this. And again, it is, I would reckon, situationally dependent on the type of person. If you have, say, somebody that is overweight, that's obese, excess body fat, if they intermittent fast, they may see an actual increase in testosterone and increase in lean body mass. I would hypothesize that if it is a man that is overweight, obese, excess body fat, if he intermittent fast, we may see an increase in testosterone along with increases in fertility as well. And the reason for this is because if he has excess body fat to burn off, he can get away with being in that caloric deficit and having longer periods without nutrition in order to then, say, lose body mass, which is going to help him to optimize testosterone. So this would be a case that I would hypothesize that if it was somebody that was excess body fat, overweight, they intermittent fast would actually help them out. In this study that I looked at, it was young, healthy males that were working out already and that their body weight was already within the normal ranges. Now, eating for high testosterone may seem complex, but it can be very simple. And if you've done all of these things that we've talked about in this video, you can then use supplementation to increase your testosterone as well. And I get asked all the time, what are the best supplements to boost my testosterone naturally? And I tell you the top supplements that I took to boost my testosterone by 400% naturally in this video. So click on this video and I'll see you there.